Kathy was like, the moment things are good, that's when you have to get the teaching job. Because when you're looking for it and you need that stability, it's not going to, like, that's when you won't find it.
Oh, hi. This is the Free Art School where we talk about living as an artist. And I'm here today with my host or guest already. Paul Mpagi
Co-host,
Sepuya,
guest.
artist Paul Mpagi Sepuya. Thank you for joining me here on the Free Art School.
You're welcome. Nice to be here with you.
Hey, so yeah, we were already rolling on the state of the art world before we started to record. Did you read that Josh Klein and piece in October?
I read a little bit of it, just on the tiny phone of my
Yeah, it's long.
very old, the tiny screen of my very old phone. So I have it bookmarked to look at. But from what I read, none of it seems new. Like I'm kind of like, who is surprised?
Yeah.
But I think it's helpful. Um, Maybe if just people are talking about this, and I guess like what we were saying before started recording, like just not pretending. Um, but I haven't read the whole thing, so I don't know how it connects to all the other stuff that is happening, like, you know, politically and economically and whatever. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, same. I haven't finished it, but it seemed to be saying a lot of things that felt familiar, and he was like putting it to words.
hmm I'm not thinking about the article. I'll read it.
Mhm.
I think maybe it's making some people start discussing things that we've already been thinking of.
Yeah, publicly.
Access to studio space, commercial vacancies, tax law,
Mm.
the incentives to leave spaces vacant
Yeah,
rather than lowering the rent when the rent is way too damn high for anyone. But as long as there's tax breaks, I mean, this is things that I think anyone who's lived in Los Angeles or New York has known. It's like we watched it throughout the like redevelopment of all all neighborhoods in Brooklyn, Lower East Side, Tribeca, right? Like the waves of like artists being displaced, and then all of these new buildings going in, and the years in which all of the real estate sat empty, waiting for a CVS to move in after like your local pharmacy was gone. It's like so much of downtown Los Angeles and places is just like empty, empty when there could be affordable, accessible spaces
yeah.
because there's tax incentives to leave it empty, you know. So,
Mm.
but
Well, it does feel like a bizarre time, and I'm trying to. Oh no! I mean, normally with this, I'm trying to focus on like the glue that keeps us together as artists. But yeah, it's a crazy time.
I think it's really is just talking about things because it's so isolating. And I feel like there's so many times in the past when and even recent and present, where it's like every artist feels all of these things as like they land on us individually. And we always take them on as like, oh my God, okay, this is my crisis with this. Can I afford the studio? Okay, this is my crisis with like, how are sales going? Or like, can I break even? Or this is my crisis if like, you know, the galleries I'm working with are like stressed in this way. But it's like these are all shared. And if we're not talking about them, then we just feel isolated in it. But it's like we're up against a system, you know, and there's a lot of, and not just talking about artists, but it's like galleries too. There are a lot of amazing gallerists who are like up against the system. They're also dealing with, all of this sort of like extraction and everything moving to the like 0.001. Um, so I just think we need to actually talk about it, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I've been focusing a lot on like psychological isolation of being an artist, but then there
Hmm.
is also the financial realities is the same thing happening. Because if you're having
Hmm.
a hard time, it's kind of embarrassing.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. But you were talking about like before this wanting to focus on the positive
Well, like,
and
yeah, there in the creative practice and in the things that we have in common, like there's the reason that we went down this path and like having even sharing this with you now
Mhm.
is the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking a lot. I was talking with a friend of mine who's now Sean adjunct at UCSD where I teach. And so this quarter, our teaching schedules align. So we're carpooling,
Mm.
which is great because we have to save on that gas money. Um, and I was talking to him about, well, I guess roughly 10-year cycles of post grad school when projects end, like when new cycles begin and end.
Mhm.
This was on my mind because I went to a really great walkthrough at Monica Mayoli's show. It's here in Los Angeles. It's at Hoffman Donahue, Hannah Hoffman and Bridget Donahue merged. And like Monica's like a legend. She's like one of the best artists like ever. And I feel like I met her. I think actually like Jack Pearson introduced me to her and Tony Payne back in like 2005 or six or something. So they were like my first kind of like LA art friends, like among the group of like first LA art friends, along with like Darren Klein and Amir Nikravan and stuff like that, this whole kind of like LA crew. But she has this show up of these small drawings. They're drawings that she made over the beginnings of lithographs from a series that she had made and finished 10 years ago. Most recently, she was known for this series of these large scale drawings based off of like the archives of Blue Boy and these kind of like queer gay male imagery. But before that, she had done a series called Black Mirror Paintings, where she was photographing her lovers, these women, their reflections in these black mirrors, and then using that as the basis for paintings. And then before that, she was doing these large scale watercolors of like men in rubber fetish. And she was talking about this thing of going on these like 10-year cycles of moving between um, gay male and lesbian imagery and ending a project and the sort of process of filing away and finding fragments of things that hadn't been finished and then using that as the starting point. So now she's using these like lithos from the Black Mirror paintings 10 years after that project ended and revisiting it by looking at the photo archives of lesbian and feminist photography workshops and separatist groups and studying and redrawing those images on top of these lithographs. But there was something about these kind of like cycles. And so I'm making a bit of a detour on getting to this point of like the positive, but it's like every project comes to an end. And then, in the same way as like, I'm in my studio right now and I'm like, okay, I've been in this building for 10 years and for the last year I'm like it's coming to an end because the project is ending. I've been realizing the project has been ending for the last year, but also I'm like I can no longer afford to have a studio.
Mm.
So it's like what do you do? It's like so now it's the convergence of like the project ending, but then like the economic reality of like even the space not being sustainable, but like so I'm thinking like through Monica's process of do you end a project? Like, what is the way, what's the positive way of looking at something ending? And how can you be in that space and make something new? So filing away can also be like the beginnings of starting something new. So I've been working on collages since the fall
Mhm.
because that's kind of like as I've been slowly not making more photographs. And that's a way to kind of look back at stuff from the last 10 years and have something that I'm making while I'm simultaneously clearing everything out of the space
Mhm.
so that when I finally need to get out of here,
Yeah.
it won't be like, it won't be like, oh my God, now where do I start? So this is what I'm thinking about like, what's the positive, And then the thing with talking with Sean was like, 10, it's been like a dozen years since I came back and went to grad school, came back to LA and went to grad school. And that was at a point of like crisis in New York. And I remember thinking, I've been gentrified out. Like I was lucky to live in a house for like a, 11 years where the rent never went up in Williamsburg, like right off of Graham Avenue. And I knew if I lost that space, I would be like thrown out into like the worst circumstances. I was like struggling to afford like $800 in rent and seeing that everyone else at that point was paying like $1,500 in rent, so I was like, okay, I need to leave this. I wasn't very forthright with like even some of my closest friends on how bad things were those last 3 years in New York.
Mhm.
But I was like, I need to find a way where I'm leaving, but I'm going to something.
Yeah.
I'm not just like falling through the floor. So I was like, I can leave New York. I will admit that I have run myself far into the ground in debt, trying to just be an artist, doing my thing, because I gave up on that steady day job. But at least I can say I'm going to do grad school. And then you think you're set for life, like Sean and I were talking about like that, you go to grad school and you do this thesis and you're like, now I've got it. And you're like, no, that runs out. So like 10 years later, it's like we were both talking about now being a point where like we've moved beyond what we set out to do with our thesis. And now it's the like, what comes next? I'm literally in the what comes next, but I'm trying to think about it positively as like there's an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, there's the clearing away for something new.
Yeah. So sorry, that was a long exposition.
Oh, I loved it. I resonate. The 10-year cycle is very powerful, and the returning to like a fragment of something that was undeveloped from the past.
Hmm.
That I have found myself doing that, and I'm confused about,
Mm.
this tension of wanting to move forward, but then you didn't, something didn't blossom. There's seeds that didn't germinate.
Hmm.
So all of that is very, I'm chewing on that now. It's so wild to hear like how you describing it being tough when you're also so prolific. So it's, yeah, it's hard to at the outside of your experience is from the outside, it seems so
It's
hard.
really yeah, it's really opaque. And I feel like that's the thing. It's like we never know. Like I also, like we said before we were recording, I was mentioning like, from 2019 to like 2024, I was in a position where there was a lot of stuff happening, and that did coincide with income from art sales. And I was busy that I could not keep up on emails and just stuff, mostly because I was also teaching full time.
Mhm.
And so I was able to afford having a studio manager for 3 days a week, and then I had a former student who I met in like a black and white photo class. She kept in touch and interned for a bit and then also kind of like helped out. And it was really, for me, that felt like a really great extension of teaching and mentoring, right? It's like a student who that can then like, work together and kind of get a sense. But like that was about a year before I had to sadly let them go. I started to realize that that was not sustainable. But it's hard in those moments when we do have those moments. And I always say to like students or like especially grad students who are like asking about like career advice, I'm like, you'll be lucky if there is a few year period where you're really living off your work. But every artist, I'm like, we gotta like figure something else. But it's hard when things are going good to keep
Yeah.
that in the back of our minds. Like, oh, okay, this is right now. And then you have that fantasy of like, oh,
I made it.
this will just keep, this is just gonna keep going. And next, I'm gonna have like I don't know what the equivalent is, but I don't know where you like. I guess I'm curious to hear about your experience of like 2008 and 9, because I was working at the Joan Mitchell Foundation, and I had a lot of friends who were like studio assistants and things like that for artists who all got laid off.
Mm.
And they're the artists that they were working for, I remember it feels like they were kind of this generation who had gotten success right after like Yale and Columbia and stuff in the 90s. And so suddenly everyone was looking for teaching jobs
All at one time.
all at one time. And, you know, and I remember I'm so thankful for Kathy Opie, who was my mentor at UCLA, but also keeping in mind like working, getting to know Lyle Ashton Harris. I like assisted him for a bit in New York, and he was working at NYU, and Jack was working at NYU and doing like commercial things. That Kathy was like, the moment things are good, that's when you have to get the teaching job because when you're looking for it and you need that stability, it's not going to like that's when you won't find it.
Yeah.
And I remember being really stubborn. I was like, because in 2017, 18 was like the first time that after years of trying to like be I was like scrappy and doing my thing. I was like trying to like, I was busy and people thought things were really well, but it wasn't until then that I'd ever really experienced selling work through a gallery or doing things. And then that's when, she made, there was Cal Arts was looking for someone to come in like as a full-time visiting artist and was like, she's like, they asked for a recommendation and I gave them your name. I think you can do this. Answer that phone. And I was like, and I did that for 3 years. And I also taught at Bard in the summers. And then I kept having the fantasy of like, can I just be an artist full time? I was like, I've never actually been an artist full time
Mhm.
other than 2011 to 2014 when I was completely broke and in debt because I got a residency in New York and I thought things were going to be great. And so I quit the Joan Mitchell Foundation.
Oh,
So even like in 2017, 18, I was like, can I just be an artist full time? And then the job at UCSD came up and like Kathy and then my friend Vishal Jagdeo, who's now on faculty at UCLA, he was like, you should apply for this job. You better apply for this job. And I was like, no, I just want to be an artist full time. Can I do it for once? And they were like, no, do like helped me with the application and I got the job. And I'm so thankful for it because if I didn't, I would have lost my house. I would never been able to have even keep a studio, space for the last couple years. And I don't know what I would be doing going forward. That's just
yeah.
being completely honest.
That's very transparent. I
So
appreciate you.
I feel like that 2008 moment, I was like, oh, wow. I graduated from NYU in 2004. And I feel like that was that crazy moment where that was like Art Fag City times. right? And it was like the like, oh my God, all these people are get all these like students are getting their thesis shows at Columbia are getting bought by collectors and they're getting solo shows in Chelsea. And I had such an identity crisis of being like an artist working. I was working full time at Creative Capital at the time before went to Joan Mitchell Foundation. And it just felt like, oh wow, like the people who are artists, like no one, it seems like no one in New York talked about all my friends worked at like Pastis and Vinegar Hill House, or they were art handlers or nannies, or a few of us worked in arts admin. I had a friend who was a bike messenger. Like everyone, but like no one talked about their day jobs. You were just like the artists were just like, I don't know, I had this like fantasy that everyone was just like this glamorous artist. And so 2008 was a real like, oh, I'm glad I had a day job. I feel like it's a very going through these cycles of like still dealing with having the fantasy of a kind of artist from the outside, just being busy and having things on the calendar looks like success, but it's like really having a show just means kind of going into debt and hoping
Ah, yeah,
that
yeah,
eventually some sales will come back. I'm like, what is this going to look like going forward? Like, I don't, sorry, ask, yeah, you
yeah.
can
There's a
change the
lot of
subject or ask
no,
questions
there's a
or,
lot of speculation. I think it's like a very raw form of entrepreneurialism, and it's like all
hmm
spec, and it may come back to you. And also, you do like when you're working on projects, there's always like a delusional hope state that you need to
hmm
get the work made.
hmm
Mhm. You just had a big show in Europe,
hmm
and I'm also in a having done a big project phase, and I've been watching my psychological ups and downs.
hmm
I'm just curious. I'm so curious to ask everyone how what kind of insights they have about watching that and how they try to care for themselves.
mm. It's hard. I feel lucky for having, working with Suzanne Vielmetter here in LA because the couple shows I've had there are the only times I've had a show where I've been able to like actually live with it.
Go back and visit it while it's
Go back and visit it while it's up. Well, no, I did a project with Land with Nomadic Division this fall. That was of like archive, like zines, material, and collages. But this big show, it's in Zurich, it's outside of Zurich at Photo Museum Winter Tour, and it's the biggest show I've ever had.
and you just went set it up left.
Had an intense week of setting it up, installs, like, and then walkthroughs, and then you have to like go to like a dinner, and then you have to like talk to people, you have to keep talking to people. And by the last day, after that last like walkthrough, I'm not good at like hiding how I'm feeling in the exact moment. I was just like, there was like a young artist. I feel so bad, like had like introduced themselves like the day before and then like asked if they could show me some work of theirs after I had just come off of like 4 days of like speaking. And I was just like, I'm sorry, I cannot. I was like, I need to actually be in a room without anyone. Um,
Yeah.
and I was just like, I just need to like sit and have a coffee and not talk to anyone. I was so happy to come home, but now it just feels really far away. And I always feel jealous of like the people who work there. I had a show at like the University of Houston back in 2019. Oh, it closed right before COVID. Um, and I remember going and like talking to some of the students, the art students who were like the gallery
Yeah.
workers in attendance, which was just so amazing. And like one of them even wrote me a letter about about their experience of like sitting with the work and identifying with like a couple of my friends who were in the images and just feeling seen. And I was like, wow, you've gotten to spend more time with this finished work than I have.
Yeah. That's often the
You
case.
know? So the show feels really far away and it's like 20 years of work. I don't think the when I initially started working with the curators that I had a sense that like the overarching project is ending.
Oh,
Um, and so now the show has gone up. right at the time when I was like, this last 10-year project is ending.
Interesting. Interesting. So you feel the shift. You didn't know it was been going to be that way, but yeah, this
Yeah,
marks the end of the period.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so sounds like you got tapped out on extrovert energy there for 4 days.
Hmm.
Talking. So I have a hard time saying the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to find a new way to say it to keep it fresh, but then
Mhm.
that's exhausting.
It is.
It's hard
It
to be
is.
like a salesperson and just say the same line again and again and again.
Again and again. Yeah. And just having to like
Mhm.
perform. But
Yeah.
I'm thankful for the show. We're trying to figure out going back for like a closing thing. There's a part of there's a certain like archival material from my studio that's in some vitrines that in the initial discussion, like I really need to be there to install and deinstall, and some of it's like private material that I'm just sort of like, I don't want other people going through. Um, but also, yeah, when we were planning with that, I wasn't worried about like the price of getting there and back. They were like, oh yeah, we can like fly you out for the first part, we'll put you up for a week in the hotel and whatever. And I was like, yeah, I'll take care of getting back there. And now I'm like, oh no, I can't, you know?
Yeah.
So just before we hopped on here, I'm like trying to figure out how like flights are, triple the cost.
Yeah, we're speaking at a time when fuel prices are spiking for world events. Just can't
Yeah.
use this in the future. Well, this is a question like the first time things started to go right for me, I had to have a meltdown. And I was around
Mm.
someone who said, an art dealer said the first time he had an artist get a review in the Times, something that he cried, it surprised him. Things going right,
Mm.
also difficult. Maybe after struggling for a long time.
Hmm.
And that's also a valid response is to freak out when you get the thing you want. Have you ever had that?
Have I ever had like a freak out for something going right?
Yeah. Or confused, you think you'll succeed, you'll get the show, or you'll get the thing that you wanted, and then it doesn't feel the way you think it would have.
I've definitely had very complicated or conflicting emotions around certain things. Like, I think this kind of goes back to expectations, and a lot of the early 2000s
Mm.
where there was a narrative where you'd look out and see, oh, this certain kind of like press or media attention or this kind of like residency or grant opportunity was presented as like, at least for me and the kind of conversations I was having with like other young artists as like, oh, so and so got this and then their career really blew up.
Yeah.
Or, you know, y- I think I can be very frank in saying like, I had a really wild experience. I think a very atypical experience at the time. I've not really kept up so much with the most recent artists in residence at the Studio Museum.
Oh, what year did you go?
I was there in 2010 to 2011. And one thing that I think that it is important to say is like I always was and had been the artist who did get a lot of attention on the things that I put out in the world. And so I think that is I have to like I can't deny that. Whether and I think a lot of it just came from being in sort of like the zine and publishing world and kind of like doing a lot of like kind of like collaborations. And sometimes it's just having friends in the right places, right? So before there was something like in the New York Times, there was so many things along the way that by the time there was something in the New York Times, it was just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
and the first thing in the New York Times, it was like in 2000 and it was pretty early. It was maybe 2008, and it was in a group article about like is this it was like I think it was Guy Trebet like writing about like is this a trend of gay artists or whatever, and it was about this exhibition that was at Powerhouse in Dumbo
Mm.
with like me and Scott Hugg and maybe like Slava Magootin and I don't know if Terrence, it was like that. It was like that realm. And I was like, at that point, I was like, okay, New York Times, this is like, what the fuck? But there had been, but it's like there were so many, there was such a like vibrant underground publishing thing. So like by the time certain things just came along, it was like, But I remember like the first time there was something in like, let's say Butt Magazine 2000, around that same time that was then like, oh wow, like now you've really made it. And I was like, how's that going to change? So jumping ahead to like the Studio Museum, it was such like a legendary program. I was 28. I had not gone to grad school. I had done LMCC the year before and Center for Photography at Woodstock. And I was just learning how to do studio visits. I had done self-directed projects. And I will say, like all of those first residencies, like I got, like by the time I got the Studio Museum, I think I had applied like maybe 3 times before. And I got it after, you know, through Dave Harper. Dave was friends with Naomi, I think through something at BAM. And Dave introduced me and like I was that like artist who was just like independently doing a lot of stuff, and so people kept seeing things, and so Naomi was like, oh hey, like maybe let's I want to think about like including a little work in this group thing that she was doing. But I already had applied to the residency several times. And so then it was at that point, like many of us do, where I was just like, I was like, I can't apply for like the third or the fourth. I need a break. And then
Yeah.
the deadline was coming around and she reached out and they reached out. I can't remember if it was her or someone else from the program was like, hey, you've applied several times. We really want to encourage you to reapply. And there was like 3 days
Oh,
deadline left. And I remember being like hustling, getting it, asking my old professor, Lori Novak, who's become a good friend, like if she would write a recommendation last minute. And then I got it. I
yeah.
was there, and then it's like people are like, oh wow, you got the Studio Museum, you've made it.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
I
it sounds
was
like you're forcing it by being so active, like you're creating your own momentum.
I think there was a lot of that. But within it, I was realizing that I didn't have the kind of foundation that other artists who were getting these opportunities had.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have the language around my work. I think being a generally like friendly, outgoing, like kind member of the community did a lot, but it can get you in the door. But I remember having, also studio visits at the time where people would ask me tough questions about the work, and I could not keep up with the conversation. I did not have a language for my work outside of my own experience. I couldn't contextualize it in terms of the field or of history or these other things. It was all completely subjective. And so I was at the Studio Museum with Kamau Patton and Simone Lee, and there's a lot to sort of say about kind of like the post Studio Museum experience, um, because of the kinds of expectations around the narrative, of it. But I feel like I was a wild card. I had, people are usually more established or they've gone to grad school or they have other kinds of support. I was literally there learning how to do studio visits.
Oh, wow. Can I
I
ask?
didn't have a project. I was figuring out something in the time, and it took me like 2 years afterwards to figure out what I had done.
Oh, only 2 years is pretty quick.
But in figuring that out, that's what I used. I used that figuring out to apply to grad school.
Interesting. Well, okay, so I have questions about these conversations you felt you couldn't keep up with, or were they from art historians or
It was like art historians. It was, I came up in like I feel like I had a really solid like photography foundation from undergrad, but the world that I kind of like moved into was like the Williamsburg downtown, Berlin crossover like gay art, realm.
Mhm.
And so something that came really into focus, and this was when I left New York, was that everyone that I was in conversation with about the work implicitly understood it because they were a member of that same community. And so even if there were things that were not immediately identifiable, there was a kind of recognition that was encoded in the work. There was a sort of like understanding of how social formations were happening and like why I was perhaps using photography in a way, why it was meaningful that like that the repetition of the kitchen and the bedroom, what kind of, how that led to the thinking about the studio and accumulation. All these things didn't have to really be spoken about because everyone just got it. And then when I left New York, it clarified a lot of the stuff that was coming up in these conversations because, you know, suddenly being in Los Angeles, I was with a group of people who were seeing it from the outside. And I had to talk about like the actual structures and like make meaning around that and connect it to like histories. And I was really interested in like literary history, and I was interested in like the kind of the histories that fall outside of like the strict art disciplines where you have to move into gossip, how you have to move into overlapping and contradicting texts and other kinds of apocryphal things. Like that's the stuff I'm really interested in. But I didn't have to do the work about that as long as I was in New York and like doing that thing. So yeah, I had some really wild studio visits that like left me in tears. Um, and I was like, I need to go back and figure out what I'm doing.
Wow, I had some personal experiences that can really empathize with what you're,
Mm,
because I moved to graduate school on the East Coast from living in San Francisco, and I had been
mhm,
doing performance art that was very informed by female identity construction and drag, and
mhm,
in a community where everyone seemed to understand it without having to talk about it. And then I went to an
mhm,
academic place on the East Coast, and I
mhm,
was called a narcissist for using my own self in
mm.
performance.
That's why. What year was that?
2003 to 5. Not by everybody. I don't want to say everyone called me a narcissist, but that was my very first
No.
people who did it, actually.
Yeah, yeah. I had something kind of similar happen in one of my first crits, but it was like one of those reads that you're like, I was kind of thankful for. I was at the time, I was like, shit, like shaken. I want to say, because I had known of your work, and I want to say, was it Shabed, Simon Alexander,
Oh, I know shop video.
who,
Did you guys go to
who
undergrad?
we went to undergrad together, and I want to say that she's maybe was one of the first people who was like, "Oh, you should know Mariah." But I'm trying to remember when this was. But by the time of around like 2012 or so, I remember seeing an article, and I think it was about your work and a few other people's, and it was uh, talking about this bringing like the bringing back of the body into abstract photography and other kinds of. I have to find this, but this is like what I'm sort of remembering of this.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love to read that.
And it was something like that, but that's also something that was really compelling for me. And that was one of those questions that I was thinking about when going back, when applying for grad school in late 2013. It was like because there's like your body is embedded in the work, right? And there's a kind of like the materiality is not just like for show, right? It's meaningful. It's tied to kind of like, you know, I feel like we both are like our hands are really important in the
Yeah.
work, even
The whole,
though
the behind the whole. the whole behind the camera, in front of the camera, and all the whole performance of getting from you performing
That,
behind, in front,
yeah,
in the making, all the touching, yeah, all this stuff.
yeah. But there's a way in which I think sometimes the body can just become really stylized and then it becomes separated from the artist, or there's this thing of like the model or whatever. And I'm wondering if like this thing of people, of people sort of like coming at your work thinking it's narcissistic, that there's an insistence of your presence, something that like I
Or
was
I was like a campy like lady doing performance.
I love that, but like there's something to insist on, like, you know, insist on that, your presence in performing that way is having value and meaning in the work. And I think there was something happening in photography around, also like around that time, where things were getting so stylized that it was like the body was just sort of like this little whatever fragment that went into things that didn't feel as like real as like one, like seeing a couple of those early shows of yours. And so that's what I was really, one of the questions that I was really trying to ask in making photographs that often deconstructed the process, but like insisted on being present, not just in an aesthetic way.
I want to sit with that for a moment, as they say.
Yeah.
But I don't mean to change the subject, but I was really fascinated what you said about Kathy Opie early being a mentor.
hmm
And
hmm
just I feel like I've always struggled to find quite a mentor. I get a little bit here and there from people.
Yeah. I mean, that was a really great thing that came out of grad school. And along with amazing other folks, I think, you know, I really appreciated Kathy's like openness. I'll never forget like she took me and um fellow grad students, Sarah and Nikita, out to lunch, and she just told us all of her day jobs that she had done along the way.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah,
it's like just like demystifying everything,
yeah.
really sharing how, she was able to make a lot of that early iconic work because of the resources she had being the lab tech at UC Irvine, and that being the way in that, because from the outside, it just seems really, you're just like, oh my God, like this person is like legendary. And so I try to do the same, because things look really impressive, I think, from the outside, but a lot, we're always messy on the inside. Um, and like I have like notebooks saved from grad school of like things that she made me think of during studio visits and crits and stuff like that, but also from like Rodney McMillan and Andrea Fraser and Silke Otto Knapp and um Jim Welling and everything. And so, yeah, I think Kathy's like a kind of like legendary mentor. And I'm one of those people where like I'm always telling students and former students, hey, keep in touch, reach out. And I
Well,
know how hard that is because like I even get sort of like hesitant to like be in touch more and reach out. But I know that at like key moments, like she's been really helpful in the guidance and especially like navigating kind of like dealing with like the art world in a different way, going from just sort of being like someone who's just like running alongside it to then like being in it. And then how to, she's like, the only way I could do what I kept doing was, you know, having that teaching job. And she's like, and I was like, oh, oh, okay.
yeah,
So I don't know if I can really be as like, you know, impactful as like a teacher or like a department chair or something as she has, transformed like in that transformative way, like she and Larry Pittman and other folks were at UCLA, but like,
you
I don't
can't
know.
You have a powerful effect and you don't even know.
I don't.
Mm. Did you have mentors before that, or was that like a really, that school
No.
environment that allowed for one?
Yeah, I think I've definitely been lucky with mentors along
God
the
damn
way.
it. I'm jealous.
But like Vince Aletti, like it's probably like the longest. I haven't seen him in a couple years, but I have to go to New York for this thing for Printed Matter, and I was like, I just was like, we need to catch up for lunch, so we're gonna have lunch. And I've actually never been to APAD, that
Oh
photo
yeah.
fair, so I'm gonna go with him to that. But Vince reached out and like bought a photo from like my undergrad thesis show for like $100 back in 2004. Um, and has always kind of kept in touch since then. And so there's been different points where I've like shown him new work or he's come, you know, to see things and talk through stuff or kind of just like meet up for a meal and stuff over the years. So that's been really wonderful. And then I was in a group show at Daniel Reich. Remember that? Remember him? He passed
Yeah,
away.
but my memories are like super. So yeah, tell me.
Yeah. But I was in a group show there and Jack Pierce, that's how I met Jack Pearson. He reached out because it was like on 26, it was like, yeah, around the corner from
Well,
from his old studio there in Chelsea. And also was very open and kind of like sharing his experience with things. And I asked him just like a lot of questions on like how he made it as an artist, you know? But like I'll never forget when he was like, yeah, like I love making portraits, but people don't buy the portraits. You know, he was like, oh yeah, he's like, I never sold anything until I started making a little scribbly drawing and then, some signs and people buy that. But it makes, I was like, oh my God, like
oh, they don't buy those portraits that are his most famous work, that
hardly ever,
his contribution to art history.
Yeah, it's like, and A.A. Bronson, through Printed Matter and like doing the zine stuff, him and Max Schumann at Printed Matter. And then along the way, like I feel like I'd fallen into like a really great. I lived on this block called Gay Powers. What we
Yeah.
called the Gay Powers over there. And like Zoe Leonard was a neighbor like on the block. Then there was like the mentors who I feel like were all the friends who were just a little bit older than me. And it just sort of felt like the Williamsburg lesbians and queers. And so like then for years like Steiner and Rachel Burks were neighbors and like Steiner was super like was especially in those years like before grad school and stuff like that and kind of like thinking through that was someone I could really talk to. Yeah, and then grad school kind of came through things and now it's kind of like and it even like kind of goes back to like Lori Novak from NYU, who was like my photo two teacher. Yeah, I was just rereading like this photo soup book that's like a transcript of these like conversations on like her experience and like being an artist and teaching. And so she, also really wonderful, like where it's just like amazing to be like, oh wow, like these people who you're 18 years old and you're like, this intimidating teacher that, 25, 6 or whatever years later, you
Crazy,
know, you
crazy.
get to be friends. So
Oh,
yeah,
it sounds like you like you hold on to good people in your life.
I try. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God, I forgot to mention Lyle because Lyle was the one who was like, why aren't you going to grad school? Like he had seen this project I did. He saw the project that I did at after the Studio Museum where I was layering and going through this sort of like the first time arranging kind of like archives and asked me to help on his project that became the Ektachrome archive, like working with him to sort of sort that stuff and just being there with him. He was like, yes, he's like, this is something you should really do. Like this is what you can get from it and like do it, do it, do it. And it
Mm.
yeah.
Oh God, it's great. And so you try to do that for younger people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like younger people, but also just like horizontally, you know.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Right now.
yeah, you know, because it's interesting like at I think about friends, you know, you kind of like all come up together and then at one point like your friend over here is like in the spotlight and you're like, "Whoa." You know, and then like then they're kind of coasting and sort of stuff moves this way and then suddenly the spotlight's on you, you know. But it's like along that way I feel like keeping in conversation and you know, participating in things and collaboration and stuff like that are ways of acknowledging like things try to like separate people or sort of be like make different narratives. And I think it's important to like be like, no, we've all been in this like wobbly raft together.
Ah, wobbly raft is right. Are you a say yes to things type person or like judicious no?
I am, I often get really overwhelmed and I get like anxiety attacks
Mhm.
from trying to say yes to everything. Um, the nice thing about for those few years of having some studio assistants was having a buffer
Mhm.
of people of like someone to be like, I'll say no to this. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, it's not coming from me. Okay, you know, because if it's up to me, like I'm the person where I'll be like completely swamped and someone will say, can you do this like this week? And I will like I will like open my iCal and like do the Tetris to like fit something in. And I just have to start telling myself like I had to start putting on my iCal like no,
Mhm.
so I wouldn't fit in more things.
Yeah.
You know, someone like, hey, can I ask you some questions? Can we meet for coffee? Or can you shoot this thing? Or can you be on this jury or something? I was like, sometimes just, yeah, I say I'm trying to be better, but I get really guilt ridden
Mhm.
when I say no.
Mhm. Yeah. I have a sign
Yeah.
up in my office, no new side projects, no favors. I ignore it.
It's hard. It's really hard.
The only time I was happy to say no is some kid wrote me and he's like, will you explain to me how you do your work so I can do it? And I was like, no.
That's a bold way of
Go
asking that.
spend 10 years, figure it out yourself.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, figure it out.
Uh, yeah, that was a fun no. Or might have ignored
Mhm.
it. Oh, here, I wanted to ask you this, and then I lost the question. Like, did you come from an arts family? Or
No,
and how did you
no.
find your way to making art then?
Oh, well, my father was a doctor, and my mom is a physical therapist. I think on my mom, like my aunts and uncles, I think my grandparents had most of them like play the piano or do something. My mom was always like, I wanted to be outside and, you know, run around the farm rather than like playing the piano. So I think she kind of, you know, that's some of my aunts and uncles like, you know, would sing kind of like in church and stuff. Um, but then on my father's side, like um, I have an older sister who was a dancer. Now she works in like kind of like like education. She like pivoted to like arts education and like doing what is it called now? Like where you kind of take different like art or performance practices and like use them as like workshopping in groups for I yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, so my one of my older half sisters is like very artistic, and
Mm,
yeah, she used to collaborate with an artist, an ex of hers, who was a pretty well-known film video artist from in Denmark.
mm.
Um, but no, I was just doing,
Went to
I
college
think,
in New York and it's around.
yeah, well, no, like as a kid, I think
Oh, you
every
grew up in
kid's
New York?
in,
Where'd you grow up?
oh no, I'm from California. I'm from
Oh,
like out by San Bernardino, just like east of Los Angeles. But yeah, I think like, every kid, you have like little art class or whatever, and then some kids stop drawing, and then some kids keep doing it. So I was doing that, and then I started, I was doing like oil painting classes when I was like 10, and then by like 14, I was still painting, but I got like a Polaroid camera, and then at 15, my mom gave me like a Minolta that she had from college. Um, I guess you used to always have to study or take like a photo class if you were doing anything in medicine.
oh,
Um,
interesting.
because I think you had to like develop, you had to know how to like take images to document something, but also I think you would go further if you're going into like radiology and you actually had to learn how to process film. So I had that Minolta, and I took some photo classes in high school at UC Riverside, and then was like, I got to go to New York. I
So
think by the time I was 16, I decided I was going to move to New York.
you knew that like the arts was a life you could do by the age of 16.
When I took that summer class at UC Riverside in 98, I think that's when I realized, I think that's when I was like, oh, wait, you can go to school for this. Up until then, I was making art, but I thought I would just go for like computer science. I was really into like programming and making like programming games and software and stuff like that.
Look at you. Surprises. Hmm.
So, but I mean, I do feel thankful that no matter how scared my decision to go to art school made my mom, years later, she was like, oh my God, she's like, when you told me you wanted to go to art school, she was like, I thought I would never be able to retire.
Yeah,
Um,
not a quite a universe of options in my family. That would it just
yeah. Yeah, but nowhere along the way was she, even when I was like in the roughest parts of it, like there was no point where, you know, she was ever like, why did you do this? Or you shouldn't have done this, or, and like she would come to all my like my mom and like my some of my aunts and uncles and stuff like I was bringing them to like Bushwick walk up loft shows when there was still like cars on the fire on like Jefferson.
yeah.
And I was so happy, and they were just like, okay. So I do feel lucky in that, like, some people, I think, so many people have like religious trauma from growing up, or like the trauma of their parents being like, art is why, like, what is this art or performance you're doing? And so I'm lucky to not have any of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I could not do it without my mom.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel the same actually.
Yeah.
Have you ever had to kick someone out of your studio?
I've had to I've had to do that
Oh, really?
twice. Yeah.
Yeah, sacred space, right? And you just can't have the wrong kind of energy in this bubble. Like the rest of the world,
Hmm.
I'll deal with it. But right here, no.
Yeah.
Do you have any takeaways? I don't know, not in a gossipy way, I'm asking, but just like takeaways from those experiences.
No, I mean they were completely different experiences. One was in those years before grad school. It was on a first date. This was so weird because the person, it was like on a date with someone who was also an artist who's now a writer. It's actually a very well-known writer and curator now. It was like maybe 2012 on like a OK Cupid date. And the conversation, and it was like a lovely time hanging out. And the conversation was like, oh, like asking like what I was working on. And I was in the process of like editing in this I had like subletted a studio from a friend over by Cooper Park in Williamsburg. And we were like walking on Greenport, and I was like, oh, well, just come, if you have questions, just come on by. And I was editing all the stuff that I'd made at the studio museum. The walls were covered with things, and like it went from like this fun hangout date to like this inquisition,
Ooh,
but like on like, what is this? Like, is this art? Like levels of stuff. But now, just a few years later, I would have the language, the ammunition to like back up what I was doing.
yeah,
But I was just like, I was just not ready or prepared for it. And that's like rude to do on a date, right? Um,
yeah,
yeah.
vibe killer.
Yeah. So I kicked him out. But then the only other time after that was, it was maybe 2018. It was around that time right when it was like, everything was like blowing up in this way.
Mhm.
Um, and there was all these requests for studio visits. And so my thing was always like, well, like, can you tell me, where are you coming from? Like, if you're a curator, like, what's your area of research? What's something to get the conversation started? I hate a studio visit where like someone just walks in the room and is like, so what's up? So someone who was like an assistant curator at a museum emailed and was like, I'd love to do a studio visit. And I was like, sometimes that email comes from like, the at something something
Yeah,
something dot, you're like, oh
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
I will, because you feel like, they're in this higher position, and this person walked in and just kind of sat down and was like, so tell me, what do you do?
What? They didn't know?
And I was like, that is the craziest thing, because at that point, I'm like, there's so much online to see, right? It's like you can come into a studio visit and say, hey, I've seen this and this. I'm really curious about this aspect. Or maybe I've seen these things and maybe this has been discussed, but I'm seeing something different. Like, come with questions.
Yeah.
Come with like
I mean, Google on the way there at least.
Google on the way, but it was so like condescending, but also
Mm,
just like
yeah.
blithe, is that the term? Like where someone just like sits down and it's like, I'm gonna do the, pony show from like, and so here
What's the point?
I
They're
it
wasting both
was
of your time.
yeah, it was like so upsetting. Um, and so actually after that, it's interesting. I really haven't done many studio visits
Mm.
since then. But also, one of the reasons why I don't do many studio visits is because a lot of the times when I've said no, I get the feeling that people just want to come to just do visit because they want to see my space. But the space is such a part of the work
Yeah.
that it's really important that it's not just like this, oh, come and like now you're on the set of the sitcom,
Oh,
which is how a lot of studio visits feel.
oh,
So I'm very, very like, you come in, yeah. Does that make sense?
yeah, of
Like
course. But
it really feels like people are like, oh my God, I'm on the set of, I don't know.
it's very personal and intense. I feel like you externalize your internal brain into the room that is your studio.
Yeah.
Have people
Yeah.
treat it lightly like that. It's
Hmm.
too much.
Yep.
It's like you got one zone in the world, you can just make all the rules.
Hmm.
I feel like we could talk for hours, and but I thought maybe we could wrap up with like, is there a piece of wisdom that someone told you early on that has been like something that you come back to be sustaining and that you could share that is, able to share, or maybe you've shared with other people?
Oh, yeah. this was maybe 2007, and I had been making the like first portraits that it's funny now that this zine republication is zine facsimile has come out through primary information. It's like, whoa. But I was, I'd been making for about 3 years those initial portraits that were kind of becoming quite notorious. And for several reasons, out of kind of like frustration, I switched. And there were several years where I was making kind of abstract work, making the first time I was making work from like fragments or remnants, trying to sort of piece things together and also text. And there was like, as I'd mentioned, kind of the context and the audience around all my early work was this very just sort of like downtown gay thing. And I was really like upset by a lot of the responses of like, wait, what is this? Why people were expecting one thing,
Okay.
this terribly frustrating space where people were only just like, the most feedback I was getting was like how hot someone thought like one of my friends was or
Yeah.
something. But
Yeah.
I was interested in all these things. So I started bringing that to the forefront. And I remember, so at this point, I was having a conversation. Maybe it was like over a meal or coffee, again with A. A. Bronson. And that was the first time he really was like, there are people who like join you or who are there because they're like really only into one thing in your work, but like as an artist your work isn't going to keep changing, and some of those people, even many of those people, might disappear, but you have to keep going and then new people will come along, and that's going to keep kind of happening. And so I've thought about that, like as things have really shifted, like there's some people who are just like really only into that early stuff. There's some people who were like really only into like when I started doing those like mirror collagey things, and then there's some people who are really only into like the later darker. There's all these moments, but like I thinking about that and the longevity of not, you know, that we keep going as artists and certain people will come along and have an investment in one part of it, but it's fine to let them go as we keep going
Yeah,
and
you
more
keep
people will
going.
come along. So,
That's a,
yeah.
that's a good one. Uh,
So,
I had one
yeah.
more actually because the community sounds so important to you, like all these people in your
Mhm.
life. And I wondered if you had something to say to people who feel isolated.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that there can be different kinds of, there can be like geographic
Yeah.
isolation. Maybe you're like in a town or a city that feels like so far away from the art world, but there can also just like be being in New York or Los Angeles and feeling isolated. Um, I think just reaching out to people, like there's a lot of people who I've gotten to know where we were in touch where like you know they may have been in Minnesota or Arizona or North Carolina or Winnipeg, and the conversation starts and you never know, like those are always sort of like introductions, so to speak, like so reaching out, like I was in New York but I was sort of like feeling isolated and needed like wanted to build like a community around my work. That's why I started making the zines. I was like, I want sending them out
Yeah.
is a way of like, you know, opening doors that then
So,
brought me to places and welcomed me later on. I did this thing also early on where I just started emailing artists. If I found their contact information, I just emailed them. A lot of people never wrote back. The first internship I got with Anthony Goicolea in 2001, I just happened to read something in like one of those local New York like art magazine, like not like a alternative art press that just happened to mention that he was in Williamsburg. And I was like, oh, I'm in Williamsburg. Just emailed him. I was like, oh, could you use a studio intern? And he's like, oh wow, I've never had a studio assistant. So like I just
yeah.
was the first person helping him like scanning film and like preparing stuff for. there were people that when I first started making photographs, before I knew what I was doing in terms of focusing on like specific to me, I was just like, I just like sometimes I just like emailed artists or people that I thought were interesting, and I was like, love to make a portrait of you. Many people didn't respond, a few did. Um, but
Is it scary to send that
it's
email?
oh yeah, it's really scary. And I think I was just really young and like I feel like I was thankful for being young and like a little like delusional, but one of the reasons why I'm not someone who photographs by like casting people or like reaching out is because I'm actually a very shy person. Like I'm not someone who like approaches people. I'm not someone who like does that thing. So it was a huge hurdle for me. So it always felt better to like start with what's close with me and then just put it out there and then let that be a place to start conversations. It's like I can make portraits of the people that I know. I can put them out there, and then maybe there'll be a conversation that can happen around that work. One thing leads to another. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So,
connect with others.
hmm
Always like whenever I feel lonely, I realize like, oh, you know what? I should check on somebody else. They probably feel more lonely.
hmm hmm yeah.
Hmm. Okay, just very quickly, so because I don't want to take too much of your time, but can you explain a little bit um what made you make the zines, how you made them and how you distributed them, and what time period that was for you, just as like, as an example of doing what you're saying, just concretely
Mhm.
for listeners.
Oh, I made the zines from 2005 to 2007. Maybe the last one was 2008. The first one was actually made like probably exactly a year ago, almost. I remember I made it over Easter weekend. My mom had moved to Texas, and I brought like all these photocopies with me and like sorted them and like stapled them and stuff like that. But I started making them because I just had all this extra, as a as a photographer making like specific pictures that were mostly portraits of people, I might shoot, you know, 2 or 3 rolls of medium format film. And there's this idea of, which I kind of hate now, of like, you choose the right one that's going to be the stand-in. You chose the right one of the ones that you made, and this becomes defining of the person and perhaps your understanding of them. And I just wanted to use all the pictures. So, when I was in the print lab, I would print up lots of things, and I'd had an idea for a zine. I had met there's this artist, Christopher Scholes. I met him and David Velasco at karaoke. They were partners at the time, and I used to go to karaoke every Tuesday for years in Brooklyn, with my roommate Amy. And we were at karaoke. We signed up for the same song, the same Smith song. And so that's how I met Christopher, and he was interning at Printed Matter. And we got to talking about zines. He had an idea for a zine that he would go on to make like a year or two later called Pinups, like a bear zine, like a gay bear zine. It was really amazing. Um, and he was like, "Yeah, you should do it." And he was interning there at Printed Matter, and he was like, "Well, I can show." He told me how to go through the process of submitting it.
Yeah, okay.
And so, it's like I had an idea, but it took being in conversation with someone else who was like, you can do it. And here's some tips on how to like get it moving. And I did that. I submitted it, and then I biked up to Chelsea and I dropped off my zines,
Photocopies, black and white photocopies,
black and
staple.
white photocopies stapled. Yeah, I was using the photocopy machine either at the NYU library, photo department, or in the NYU photo department, because Lori used to let me come back and
Uh,
print there. Or I was working at Creative Capital, and so they were in the same office as the Warhol Foundation. So when I was an office assistant, so if I was given a task to photocopy things, I would sneak in my own photocopies, and then I'd bike back home and I'd sit and watch Law and Order, and probably drink whiskey and fold them and staple them. And I started taking them to printed matter. AA connected me with Ann Dean and Andrew Zealy in Toronto at Art Metropole. And Anne became a big supporter, and then they were there. And then I was sending them to Colette in Paris and Skylight Books here in LA. And kind of like the network sort of grew. Um, and I I think the first two were in 2005. I think the third and fourth were 2006. The seventh was 2007. The sixth and seventh were 2007. Yeah.
Mm.
So it was really like, the first one just felt like I just needed to do it. And then I started thinking a little more specifically with each one. I tried out what could a portrait be in sequence.
Mm.
It was kind of like and this came up with I forget his name, one of someone from this magazine called Family Style. And he asked something that no one else had asked. He asked if I had been influenced by Warhol's screen tests. And I
Mhm.
was like, actually, yes. It's like if the entire film is just looking at one person, sort of like an attempt to sort of compose themselves in anticipation of sort of being seen, but it's not really the final thing. The zines, in a sense, were the same thing. I was like, I wanted to sort of extend a portrait in this way, and I could play with, duration. It allowed me to play with sequence. It wasn't about like the frame, like the specific
Yeah.
shot.
Was it one roll of film, like 10 or 12 shots or something?
They would be the second one was one roll of film. I this friend Alex, he had this beard and it made me think of like F. Holland Day. And so I shot one roll of film of him, but the idea of the zine was that all of the images were like the one that's not quite right
Yeah.
because he couldn't be F. Holland Day. That's the only one where it was like one roll of film. The first one incorporated contact sheets. The third one was was two portraits that of two strangers who were brought together around this text that my friend Ido Fluke had written. The fourth was like a collaboration with my friend Dean. The fifth was a self-portrait. That may have been one roll of film, but typically I would shoot like 1 to 3 rolls of film. Yeah.
Okay, again, like I could keep asking you things for hours, so I would like to um say thank you for your time. Because I'm gonna go on and on.